Okay, please come and join us for our closing plenary session. The title is The Role of Everyone. And as the director of the Global Center for Women and Justice at Vanguard University, I want to thank our partners here for their welcome reception, for our hosts, Pastor Jackie and Lenora, for showing us a little about the history of the Navajo Nation and the families, and learning from so many of the speakers about concepts that I can take home and apply in my community. I love 7 generations. I used to only think in 3 generations, but after this, it's 7, nothing less. So what I want to start with is a little bit of a framing for the mission and goal of the Global Center for Women and Justice. And I have a couple of slides that will illustrate our image. So when I lived in Greece, I lived there for 10 years. If anybody wants to know how to cook Greek, my first book was a Greek cookbook. And there is a culture from 3,000 years ago called Minoan people. And I went to the palace of Knossos, and in the pantry, they had this jug, they had several, called a bithari, and it was huge. And I'm standing up because I want you to know I could stand up inside of the bithari, and you could just barely see the top of my head. And I know I'm vertically challenged, but that's still a big jug. And they would bring olive oil and grain into the kitchen in those big jugs. But not one person could carry it alone. So they baked handles. And you guys turn around and look at this picture. The handles are baked into the sides of the bithari from the top all the way to the bottom. So you could have 10, and there are pictures of 10 or 12 people carrying that very heavy bithari into the house. And when we developed our mission for the Global Center for Women and Justice, we wanted a mission that would create space for all of our students, no matter what their majors were, to be able to grab a handle and be part of moving things forward. Our mission is research, education, advocacy, collaboration to build hope. And I believe without collaboration, there really won't be hope, because we all have to do this together. And in my second slide, I want you to see a little bit of what we see as really important places. Well, actually, this is for my new friend, Tyesha. These are the definitions of research, education, advocacy, and collaboration. And then my last slide is the federal model for collaboration in prevention, protection, prosecution, partnership, and policy. And you'll be able to download this off of Sketch. But I want you to think about being part of a collaborative, of a community working together to end human trafficking, and looking for which handle is yours to grab. Alicia has found, working in the schools with kids in socioeconomically risky areas. And Ruthie has developed work in her schools and with preparing university students. Derek's led law enforcement investigations. You've met so many people who have found their handle. And I want you, all of our audience and our community, to be thinking about what what is your role? Because there is a role for everyone. So you can take the slide down, and I'm going to pass on the space and time now to Tyesha Wood.
Hello, it works. Thank you for sharing the photos. I was trying to imagine when you said it was as tall as me. And we were almost the same size, so I thought, okay, it's as tall as me too, but is it as wide as me? Joking. Um, Definitely there's, I would say there's what the Greeks in their history and what I know in our culture, Native American cultures, and in our Navajo culture and what we've been taught. There's a lot of lessons there. And I want to say the lesson in providing and our purpose aligns with that, with the Greeks, but what we're trying to do here with human trafficking. I certainly believe wholeheartedly that we all have a purpose in our lives and in our communities, within our families, within our roles, whether it's our professional roles. I think there is a gap, though, in knowing our purpose, but sharing it with others. And because there's a lot of resources from the work that I've done within those tribal communities, I worked in law enforcement. Sometimes even I, as law enforcement, didn't know the services were available when they were available at that time. It wasn't until after the fact. I thought, okay, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know I could call this person, or I didn't know I could get training from here. Or I didn't know that I had someone here in the community that could help me. So sometimes again, everybody has a purpose, and we all, I think, strive to hold that to help our communities, but we don't know each other's roles. And I think that's one part in our community that we should acknowledge and start talking about and defining, like where we are in our community and how we can best help with the experiences and the talents that we have. Within the Navajo Nation, like we've talked about that we always talk about, we value our sovereignty. We would fight for our sovereignty. We've been warriors for many, many years, and it's been across the community. It's men, it's women, it's children, and I think now is the time to establish our roles, to identify as warriors who we are, to protect our families, to protect our community. And it's along the 5, if we do those, you can bring that slide back up, of the purpose, the prevention, the policies. Can we bring that slide back up? I think they all start with a P. So definitely the pillars of our community, right? And when we talk about pillars in our community, it's our children, it's our elders, it's our mothers, fathers, it's our family. So each of these pillars applies to our community, as elders, as children, as sisters, brothers, law enforcement, as tribal leadership, as school teachers, as nurses. We each have a role in one of these pillars. Do you say anything? Do you agree with me, First Lady?
Looking back at Dr. Morgan, what was some of the questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
This is a conversation.
This is a conversation
Chat. We're having a chat.
and helping people understand that they have a role.
You know, I always put it in the context of, everybody has a sphere of influence. And I say that because when I talk to older Navajo people, and I've heard their remarks at different times, different places, and they say that because of their lack of Western schooling, they don't have the knowledge and they don't have anything to offer. And to me, that's really sad to hear that. And I always tell them, you do have a role in all of this. You have the knowledge. You have, a lot of these cultural teachings and the way they were raised, it has built-in resilience tools. They already have those skills. If it were Western education, Western knowledge, if that were the true knowledge and tools and skills needed to survive. How did we survive all these generations without it as Native peoples? And I hope that there's a paradigm shift happening for different sectors of our population as Navajo people. And that's where it really comes into play how important Navajo culture, Navajo language, Navajo teaching, our oral history, all those teachings, they have to be there. And I always say Western education, Western everything else comes in to supplement and maybe to even complement some of what was already there. It should be coming in to enhance it. And so, and in a way to support it as well, because we don't want to replace something that was all the positive aspects to who we are as a people. We want to keep those, retain those items. And over time, we've always said, to survive this long, where you already know that we're a people who adapt, and we're very good at that. We pick and choose what we want to incorporate. And so in our sphere of influence, and for the young people, I always tell them, you have the opportunity to learn both. And some of us, that's what we were challenged with growing up. Learn both, excel in both. And in Navajo, they say, if you can move back and forth at ease within different, you can go home, herd sheep, help there and be able to engage and communicate with your own people. And then you go off the nation or you go into a different environment where everything is Western thought and Western terminology, Western methods. And to move back and forth like that, it's, to me, that person who has the ability and the skills to do that, they have it made. They're not going to feel intimidated by either culture. They have actually attained the skills and the knowledge needed to really incorporate from both worldviews, both perspectives, and the things that are the methodologies and the framework that operate in both I call them worldviews. So yeah.
So I kind of like the two of you to speak from, I apologize.
Okay, so I'd really like to ask the two of you to answer this question of what people's roles are in this, because we're talking about building resilience and resistance to exploitation. And it's not just a linear approach to stop human trafficking. In the podcast that we do out of the Global Center, it's progressive ending. We're always finding other pathways that contribute to reducing and to blocking the predators and that sort of thing. So I'd like you to identify roles from the public sector, Tyesha, and then from the family sector, First Lady. So you get to go first. Who are the people that maybe are in our public sector and they think, oh, human trafficking, that's for the director of criminal investigations, not my job?
So when I think of public sector, I'm thinking, anyone besides the family. Although I think in any country, in that cultural lens, again, it's everybody. When we talk about policy, sometimes the term stakeholders thrown out. Who is a stakeholder of a community? Is that law enforcement? Is that public safety? Is that health and human services? Is that the school? Council. So definitely the roles in these stakeholders in our community are important. We talked about our sovereignty and the governing, our governing nation, whether it's the legislative, executive, or judicial. Each of those people have a role in the continuity of our laws, of our communities. But it goes finer to you can look further into that. So if we're talking about a police officer, or we're talking about a judge, or we're talking about a council member, each of those roles, they're the lawmaker, but they're also, it could be a mother, they could be a father, they could be perhaps their student if they're in secondary education, or they're grad student, or they could within law enforcement as well. I'm sorry, not law enforcement, in tribal communities, there's a lot of times that one role, one person wears many hats. So when we look at it, to answer this question, I can't clearly define the public policy role, because I feel like it's related to the familial role. Like we are family, our kinship's is strong. So definitely we could talk about lawmakers, but I think First Lady talked about this morning. It's bringing it back to the family, and using that strength in our family and in our culture. And that's where it originates, and that's where it blooms, because we're parents first. And I think you may or may not have heard the concept five-fingered beings, right? We're all five-fingered beings. We may have differences in appearance, in color, hair color. Mm-hmm. We could all be different in those aspects, but we are all five-fingered beings. So our purpose and our role could be many things. If we want to combat human trafficking, if we want to acknowledge there's a problem, if we want to have solutions, if we want to provide resources and services for those victims of human trafficking, everybody's purpose is there. But I think I'm thinking too much about this, because it's a wonderful concept to talk about.
Let me ask you another question, because I know you are a deep thinker. And
I have to go back to law enforcement. I just want to know about law enforcement.
You made me think of when I visited India and saw an aftercare director who told me that his model for caring for these children was, what would I give my children? Right. Very much that family. But the director this morning talked about community mapping. And in this role of everyone, I think there are people in our community, in the public sector, that don't realize they are missing, and we aren't able to carry this because they haven't shown up. They might be a first responder from the fire department. Those kinds of, maybe teachers. What do you think?
So I think that would go back to what we talked about, is knowing our role, right? Knowing our purpose. What is that purpose? But once you identify, are you sharing it with others? Because on the other spectrum, those people may not know that those services are available. So within law enforcement, we can provide training. I mean, there's training out there with human trafficking. I mean, there's just been such an increase in needed training. Having that cultural component in there for Native Nation is a little bit more difficult, but there are other nations other areas to find help. But within law enforcement, I definitely think that there are services and departments not communicating with each other. For example, victim services or health and human services. School, I know there's been an increase in schools asking about, how do we get human trafficking training? And is that something that we can give to our students? I believe in California, isn't it a state mandate now that schools are talking about human trafficking?
Oh, I can't help myself now. I'm going to tell you. In California, yes, we do have mandated training, once in middle school and once in high school. And so that's not like prevention where you like brushing your teeth. It has to be much more than that. So yeah, okay, we're on the same team.
Right. So going back to that question of public role, it should be all one team, one service. I said it earlier in my discussion, in case you missed it. We can enact laws, we can be successful in prosecuting laws, but let's not forget that we need to have services for our victims, those that went through from the very beginning, that we should have something there for them. But then I think that I'll is manifested or originates through the awareness of human trafficking. And I think that's my cue to slide it over to the family role.
Okay.
And so in terms of the family and what their role is in all of this, and I've always just honed in on this as, and really it does go back to all criminal justice studies. Anybody who studies the criminal mind and the criminal behavior and why and how do people end up doing the things that they do and the psychology side of it all, it really does go back down to their childhood and just what they were exposed to and the things that they've experienced. And that's why I always hone back in on the home and the family. And of course, and you're talking about the 5 Ps, right? And I know in your book you mentioned the 6th one. As brothers and sisters in Christ, we talk about the power of prayer, and I truly believe that. And in any type of healing situation, there's always a spiritual aspect to it. And so, to me, that's something that cannot also be out of this conversation, even though I think yesterday and today we kind of kept that out of these conversations. But in terms of home, I always hone in on no matter what profession you go into, no matter what career field you go into, it's always going to be that the most important roles we have in our lives is as a mom and as a dad. And the whole institution of marriage, the whole business of upbringing children. And yesterday I talked about nation building, and it's on all of us. So right here, we're talking about Navajo Nation. We should all be in the business of nation building. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about every single child that's conceived, that's born, that's being raised. What environment do we want to provide for them? What is it that we want to share with them? What kind of teachings do we want to impart on them? And there's so much more Navajos who are attending, higher education now. And we know they have access to do a lot more studies in a lot of these areas. And I really hone in on, early childhood education, early childhood development, early childhood mental health. And if you're ever going to be, become a parent, which is probably just about almost all of us, it's really important to really get a good understanding of that. I guess you can go from the cultural sense of what the teachings are there, and then to also get the Western sense of what's all been researched and what the studies show, and to put both of those two things together. And it will, those first few years, or first, the childhood of our children, it really does determine how their adult lives are going to look like. And I know human trafficking is a topic that's all things that, that's just one item and a whole slew of other things that we can put in as criminal behaviors. That's a crime. And when we're talking about prevention, we're talking about, we don't want anybody to become the victim of any type of crime. And so really to hone in back at the family level, you're preventing a lot of, or actually probably every kind of crime imaginable. You want to keep your child out of the criminal justice system. And that should be all of our goals. And it's sad instead that a lot of times we're asking for resources, for more law enforcement, for more training for dispatchers, for emergency management, for crisis response, for correctional facilities, more court personnel, for correctional facility personnel, prosecutors, and all the way down the line, even to coroners and everybody else like that. So that pretty much tells you where the emphasis has always been on in a public health lens. We wait for something to happen, and all our focus has been on that end. But I think now when we're talking about education prevention, we're going to the front end. We want to understand what it is that's making us so vulnerable to have our people and our children going up in these very negative environments, negative experiences. And that's what we're trying to stop. And I think when you start with the home institution, you're pretty much going to the heart of it all.
If I could add to that. If my mic, there we go. If I could add to that. Definitely agree with First Lady. We have to get away from reacting. We need to prevent, we need to be proactive rather than reactive. And how do we do that? And there may be, First Lady had a lot of good points about, bringing it home and so that cultural, that lens and those teachings, and then versus the westernized world or the views and the teachings there. It's definitely confusing, I think, for those, my generation, who went to school and have to balance the act between going back home and working away from home being the Navajo Nation. And then even as law enforcement, we have a lot of cultural respect where, we're not supposed to be around bad things. It may be a body that I have to investigate, a homicide, or something that we don't want, it's kind of frowned upon, or we don't want to talk about it. But again, to be proactive, you have to have some discussions that may not be very easy with our children. But one of the things I see with the kids, and even with my children, I'm a mother first. Then I used to be in law enforcement, but I'm always a mom first. And bringing up a situation to my kids with my daughter once, we were driving down the road, and this is in the city. And I said, daughter, what street are we on? And she's on her phone. And she looks up and she says, I don't know. And I said, well, you need to know. And the daughter, what is your brother wearing right now? Don't look back at him right now, but tell me what he's wearing. Give me the color of his shirt. Tell me what shoes. And, and she didn't understand why I was asking this. And she's, as a teenager, would say, I don't know. But I tell her, I said, if something should happen, heaven forbid something should happen, and you're the only one to talk to and report this, you need to know these things. You know what street you're on. You know what kind of car we're driving. You need to know your surroundings. You need to be aware of those surroundings, especially your brother. What is he wearing? How would you describe him right now? And sometimes I think in some roles, those in community, talking that way to your kids, maybe like, you shouldn't be talking that way. You're putting that negative energy out there, and you don't want to bring it back. But at the same time, I want my child and my children to be able to answer those questions and not freak out should it come to that point. But I think that these are the conversations we need to have in our home. It may be a little bit difficult at times, but it's about being prepared and responding and knowing who to call and knowing who to trust. But it could be a child or it could be a sibling that has to make that report. And you want to make sure that everything is covered or what you can best remember, because that could be very pertinent. And if there's police involved and they need this information. So having those conversations are difficult, but they're definitely necessary in our homes.
I think the more often we talk about having those conversations, the more normal it comes for people that it's more difficult. And I raised 2 daughters and I did all of those things. I wouldn't even let them go to a restroom in a restaurant alone. They were always together. I was invited my first time here to a Native women's conference in 2015, and my task was to talk to moms. I thought it was moms. And I looked back at the invitation, it was to women, about how to keep your kids safe from human trafficking. And when I arrived and the audience that I was speaking to was assembled, it was like 150 women, 75%, and that's kind of a modest estimate, were grandmothers. And afterwards, the women who lined up to talk to me were grandmothers whose daughters were in domestic violence situations, were in really untenable situations. And so grandma was raising kids. And I began to understand how central it is to be part of a community that supports the whole family. And I started thinking about training grandparents. And I do that now. Ruthie, I've done training for grandparents at Laguna Woods because they're providing daycare while moms go to work. And so I taught grandparents how to use NetSmarts so that their kids are playing games that are practical prevention. And I think we need to make things really accessible in the community around the kids. I love your story about meeting a grandpa in Alaska. That's not your version of it. That's my version of it, because you had to buy him Starbucks. But the idea of aunties and sisters and an extended family that really becomes a hedge around those children. How do we begin to include them and show them that they have an important purpose in prevention to protect their kids from all kinds of exploitation, not just human trafficking. And as Matthew said yesterday, human trafficking is more of an umbrella for a lot of the things that are risky for our kids and for our community. And so the role of everybody is to take a watch, to keep the whole camp safe, to make sure that uncles, and I love the warrior image for me, because we can't take a day off as parents. I was listening to Alicia, who left her 2-year-old with dad and calling to check in to make sure everything is good. Parenting is not an 8-hour-a-day job. It's all day, and we are all together in this. And how can we figure out what our role is in our theme to build a resilient child? And a resilient child feels safe. So when you're there, you create that safety. A resilient child feels empowered. They have voice. And a resilient child can get up after they fall down. I think it's really important to understand that children begin to learn to walk when they're very close to the ground. And if we try to protect them from falling, they don't become resilient. But we're there to be with them and show them that they can get up again. Everybody has a role in protecting our children.
I agree. And I think children have a handle on that as well.
What? Children do?
Yes.
Tell me.
They teach us, I've learned many lessons from even time this morning. My son says, "How long have you been talking?" I only got an hour. And he says, "You remember, Mom, you only supposed to talk for an hour." But we learn so much from our children, and they are pure at heart. And they may be honest, saying, "You're spending too much time at work, or you're spending too much time with your friends, or you're spending, and that should be that role in the community where, okay, you know what, I need to focus on this and the important things in my life." Or, they make the easiest things are the simplest things, I think, and vice versa. Simplest things are the easiest things. So kids have that mentality and that pure heart and that simple heart. They just love, and that's a part of our roles in our community. Again, identifying our roles, outlining our roles, knowing our roles, finding that purpose and sharing it with each other. Because kids tell us, share. So they can be teachers in so many different ways.
One of the things that I think is also important to talk about when it comes to our roles and I guess the bringing up of all children is what Dr. Brenzer, that whole panel we're talking about, the holistic health of us, the adults. I mean, you jump into, some of us got married thinking we weren't the one with the issues, right? It was, we blame, we're like, you need to be the one to work on all your whatever, right? But seriously, at some point in our lives, and hopefully, and I always say this to kids, it's like, hopefully before you even start thinking about marriage, you one day really take a look at yourself and maybe do it with a therapist, right? And sometimes I joke around and I say, at this point, we all need therapy. But, it's something that I think each individual has to do it. You have to engage in it at some point, and hopefully before marriage. Because if you can sort out some of the reasons why you think the way you do, you operate the way you do, the kind of person that you are, and to kind of start working through some of that. And then because when you get into a relationship, there's going to be certain things that the other person's going to start pointing out, right? Like all those things that kind of annoy them. And you thought you were perfect. Hey. And so, and then it gets worse. The two of you're married, and then a child comes in. And when a child comes into the whole scene, there's going to be times where, for women, for all of us probably, we grow up thinking that I am not going to be that mother, right? We say that about, and then one day you get so annoyed by your kids, and all of a sudden your mother comes out, right? I mean, little things like that. We think we have a hold on certain things, but there's things that kind of stay in the crevices of ourselves. And there's going to be certain things that are going to make it come out. As much as you try to hide it, and sometimes I think we just subconsciously maybe don't know that they're there. And so when those things do happen, it's really important to start working through those processes of trying to understand why that's there. And then it's another process to turn those behaviors around, to respond differently, and to really become aware of where you are emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and physically. And then, and that, because all of that affects the way we relate to any other person and how we respond or react to different situations that arise in our lives. And so that's something that I always bring up, because if we really want to stop perpetuating certain things, that's best to not show the next generation. I mean, we're the role models for them, and we don't want to be the one to continue doing certain things the way maybe we've always seen it done. And sometimes I know that's really hard to accept, to really assess like the way your parents did their parenting, and forgiving them for all the places where they fell short, and then just kind of being thankful for where they did a good job, right? And then, but for us, I think it's on every person to really figure out and learn what kind of parent they want to be, and how they want to model that role for the child that they're bringing up, and the things that they really want to teach them. That's the most important part, because I see a lot of families, they kind of give that to the schools or whatever institution they put them in, or the babysitters, or I don't know, whoever it is that's kind of raising the child for them. And to me, that's not the way it should be. As a mom and as a dad, we have so much influence on the children that we raise, or even those that we come into contact with. And so really that's where we have the power of influence. And that's where every child that we encounter, every teenager in our community that we come in contact with, or that befriends our kids, it's important to share all these things with them, and to really to treat them and set them up for what the future looks like for them, and try to make them start thinking about some of the things that they need to start thinking about. Just planting those seeds of the important things in life, right? And to me, the most important thing is, how they're going to be in a marriage situation, what kind of spouse they're going to be. And then, of course, the growing up, the parenting of their own children and grandchildren. And so
It's like,
that's all
yeah,
where I come back to.
it's all the way. And you really bring it back to, we're raising the next generation of adults. And I have a really deep concern about the adolescent youth, the youth that's becoming an adult. And I almost jumped out of my chair. I was so excited to hear you talking with your daughter about situational awareness. And earlier in your other presentation, you talked about the predators are one step ahead. And we have to be observant and teach our children to be observant so that they are also one step ahead. And the concept of complementary tribal and Western knowledge, this is a wonderful way to bring that together as we think about bystander principles and empowering youth to watch out for each other. And at Vanguard, Ruthie has been a real leader in peer-to-peer youth-led mentoring, because honestly, anybody raised a 14-year-old girl, they roll their eyes when they talk to you, because suddenly you are not as smart as you were a few years ago, and yet they will listen to another 14-year-old. So if I lived in your community and had a daughter, I would want her to hang out with your daughter, because your daughter would be a great peer leader. And I think we can encourage our youth to find their handle in protecting youth and children in our community by empowering them to do peer-to-peer youth-led prevention.
Amen.
I know, I can't help myself. I get really excited about working with
Totally agree.
adolescents.
And when you talk to children, adolescents or children, and you tell them that they have a role in their purpose, and that's to protect their siblings or protect their community or protect their parents, you know that you're instilling pride in them, because they have,
You trust them.
right.
Yeah.
They have a job, and sometimes in the children's eyes, that means more to them than anything. Like, I'm protecting my sister, I'm protecting my brother, I'm protecting myself, and again, that's the role that we have as parents, but also the role as we have as protectors, but we're instilling that in others. And that's what needs to be shared amongst everybody. I mean, it may be even so with people my age, maybe that, I should be prepared for situations. If somebody should come to me and say something, how do I respond to what they're telling me? If it's something where they need help, do I know those resources for them? Do I know those resources? Because I can teach and work in a different community, not my own, but I mean, do I know where their sources are available if so it's asked upon me for some reason? So again, that falls into the role of who we are in our community. And I keep going back to, we need to share that knowledge that we have as what we can provide or what we can assist with. And it should always be an open door. Like, if I don't have the answers, I say, well, we'll find it out. We'll figure it out together. Again, I think that goes back into the role of who we are. It's continuous and it's ever changing, because that's as we've known through time and time from our history, it's always changed. But we've had a strong center and a strong cultural core to where we are here right now to continue that.
You had one more remark?
Oh, I was just gonna say, that's really, I guess that's kind of what we're figuring out when working on the tribal community response plan, right? You bring in all these agencies, and I guess in a way, from the community standpoint, there's a sense that all these agencies already know what each other's roles are, and they all communicate, and they should already be in the business of coordinating, right? And that's not the way that it plays out most of the time. And I don't think that just happens, that's not just for tribal communities that exist. It's in a lot of places and for different reasons, but it's just, but to strengthen those, just as Director Henderson was saying this morning, to really find those gaps and strengthen those existing gaps so that there's, everyone kind of knows where they fit in and what kind of services they provide. And if somebody comes to them, like asking for certain things, that we should kind of all know where to kind of direct them to. And right now we don't feel so confident in having a lot of, not access, but to even just to have that information right at hand.
I'm really excited when the complete plan rolls out to see how those connections are supported in that. And we are really grateful for the opportunity to be here. And actually, I think that this is an example of Western and Navajo being complementary. And so I feel a little nostalgic because tomorrow I'm going to leave, and I've had Matthew for almost 4 years, and he's bringing back the complementary education, and yet very rooted in who he is as a Navajo in this work against human trafficking. And so I would like to invite Matthew to join this the role of everyone, partly as a representative of a young person who has been mentored and really modeled that peer youth-led empowerment to end human trafficking.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have come to the close of this two-part portion. And I just wanted to extend a great gratitude to everyone here, everyone in our attendance, and those online watching us. It really means a lot from the bottom of my heart. And, this issue is something that I felt in my heart 3 years ago. It wasn't talked about enough. I went to high school. I didn't get educated on this. I didn't hear about this. I didn't know the signs. I didn't know the definitions. I didn't know the differences between prevention, protection, prosecution when it regards to this. And that's really why, I did this. And I'm happy that all of you are partners in this. And Dr. Morgan, you said it best when we're complementing each other, and I believe this established relationship is not over and it won't end. And I'm just glad you saw my vision, and I'm really, really just thankful for your leadership, for bringing this to light to help not just me, but my peers, my nieces, my nephews. We're doing this for them, and we're doing this because of them. And I just wanted to just say thank you for that. And I'm just so excited to be back home here in Arizona, even though I finished my education, but not done yet. But I'm excited to be home and be a resource for my family and my friends here on the Navajo Nation. But with the light of that, I'm going to ask my parents to help me do something. And I would like to, Dr. Morgan, if you would come with me, and First Lady. And Derek, if you're also able to come up here. As we conclude this conference, I just wanted to, in partnership and in light of really just showing our appreciation for everything that you all have done this past week, we just wanted to extend our appreciation for the both of you. And we'd like to present each of you with these co-talker blankets. So if y'all want to step to the front. All right, we're gonna wrap these around you too. And before we do that, I just wanted to share a little bit about more of what these blankets represent. For us in our Native culture, we give these blankets out for signs of friendship, gratitude, and respect. So for each of you today, we honor you, and we're just thankful that you see us. First Lady, I don't know if you want to give some words of just gratitude for this.
So thank you again to both of you here from the Global Center for Women in Justice at this time of the day. But thank you for bringing, and to Matthew really, to making this partnership happen. You know, it was 3 years ago that I got an email in my inbox, and it was from Matthew, and he really did. He had a passion for bringing this to the Navajo Nation after taking this to different countries. And so it really is a global effort. And for him to think about bringing this back to the tribal lands, that's very commendable on his end. And from my office, you know, we really push for education, and it's always, it's always so wonderful to see our young people pursuing the studies that they really are interested in. And then, of course, to be taking upon projects like this and then extending to really forming these partnerships that really benefit our Navajo people, Navajo families, and Navajo communities. And so thank you for, and it's been a wait. We wanted to do this back in 2020. So, I mean, we've had to delay it for the past 2 years. And so now that it's here, we've done it. And so, and really, but, you know, going forward, I'm really looking forward to what will come out of this in the future. So anybody watching and who wants to also kind of become a part of these conversations, you know, this is something we don't want it to be a one and done kind of deal. And it's something that we want to keep, we want to keep awareness and education about this topic, around this topic for our community members, because, you know, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, you look at, there's already efforts and there's already groups working on this particular topic, and to really even to, you know, extend engage them in some of these here, because I mean, Navajo goes into those 3 states. So I mean, it's got a lot of potential to do a lot of things in for tribal communities. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, First Lady. So in conclusion with today, I'm going to give it back to Dr. Morgan to give closing remarks. But I just want to, again, just extend my appreciation, not just for these two, but really for everybody, our team, our students, Michaela and Hannah, Pastor Lynette with helping with all the technical side with our team, and then our presenters, Ruthie, Dr. Brenda, Tyesha, Alicia, Kendra, and really everybody else who participated, Director Henderson, the Assistant Secretary, and Catherine Chan from our Trafficking in Persons office. And we just really thank you, Dr. Morgan and Derek, because without you, we wouldn't have those relationships. And I feel like now we're ending this weekend. You've seen everything that we've been through. You've seen the history, and you've learned a lot of information from this past weekend. And my hope and my prayer is that this doesn't end here, and that you educate more people on the things happening in their backyards. And if you're in the sound of my voice, online or in this room, I empower you now to be a part of these conversations and to be a part of the fight against human trafficking. And it's not just on us, it's not just on the presenters, but it's on all of us to ensure the protection of our children and to ensure their futures. So if you're listening and you're watching this later, or if you're live with us now, I just encourage you and I empower you to be that voice for those who are voiceless and to ensure justice for those being crushed. So thank you all for participating this week, and I'm going to give it to Dr. Morgan. Oh, just kidding. I'm the last word, so we're going to end it here. And again, please join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. for an optional service with Dr. Morgan at Mountaintop Church. It's going to be amazing, and we're going to have such a great time and a great message with the rest of our team. So thank you so much for joining us this weekend, and we hope you learned something. And if you did, share that with others. Share this information. It's on you. A lot of times I would tell different places that I'm tired of doing the presentations and I'm tired of doing the education. So let's raise up the next generation of leaders to do things like this and to fight for our people. So thank you, and we'll see you next year.